Hello guys, in this video I want to demonstrate you how real Laravel project may evolve over time. So we will try to mimic the real-life scenario when the client changes their mind about something and how developers should react, how to change things, how to change features. An example is pretty simple but quite realistic to mimic the real-life scenario. So imagine you have CRUD of posts, so someone may manage posts in a form, then in a table, and this is the first simple project, a CRUD. But then the client changes their mind, and here I have 5 pull requests in the repository about changes of the project. So for example, first change is to introduce the admin user, so only admin can delete the post, other users can only manage but not delete. Next change is to have published feature, also a publisher role. So then you need to switch from just admin to roles table. Then third change, another developer or CTO advises to use policies for that, so refactoring of the code again. Then at some point some other role appeared, for example editor or something, and then you want to switch from roles to the whole permission system, so roles and permissions. And final change, the client wants to manage the roles and permissions, so you want to introduce Spati package for permissions. So how to do that step by step, and what are the pitfalls to avoid along the way, and how to make it not break the project along the way. Let's take a look. The initial project that I've just shown you a minute ago is just a simple route resource for the post with middleware auth. The controller is just simple index, create, store, show, edit, update, destroy, typical Laravel resource controller. And then I asked my colleague Nereus to perform those 5 changes, and from here I will move to GitHub to show them to you. So imagine a change that there's an admin role from now and they can delete the posts. So first we need to introduce the role admin, right? And the most simple case is just to add a boolean field is admin for simplicity, because at this point the project isn't complex to add permissions or anything. So we go for the simplest solution is admin, and then in a seeder you add probably admin user, right? Then you need a middleware check for is admin or not, and then you would add that middleware in your routes. So here's a middleware, if not admin, then abort 403, which is forbidden. Then you register that middleware in the kernel file, and then you add that is admin to the controller, to the construct method of the controller, middleware is admin only for destroy. And also you secure that not only from the backend, but from the front end. So if the user is admin, only then they see the delete button. Okay, it's done. But now, how do you ensure that you didn't break anything? And at this point, you need to introduce automated testing. So if you need any restructuring of the code, especially for core features like permissions or something related to money, even worse, you need to absolutely have automated testing. And in this pull request, which is public on GitHub, and you can check that out, we're introducing automated testing. Here's the test, post controller test. It's a feature test. So we test only 2 things. Test non-admin user cannot delete post, and test admin user can delete post. And for that, to prepare the automated testing, we need to use factories to create fake post and fake user. Then we're doing this acting as user and try to call the specific route and see what the response is, forbidden or not. For this example, we're using SQLite, so we change that in PHP unit XML, uncomment those lines which are commented by default. And also in the factories, we have post factory with fake data and user factory with admin as well to fake the admin. So if we go back to the test here, we have user factory as a simple user, and then user factory admin if we want to use admin. And this is our first pull request. Let's move on to other change. Our second change and second pull request is introducing the publisher role and published field. So this is the migration, and I've zoomed in a bit the GitHub code. So is published is a new field in the posts table, but that's not the only change. You realize that then you need a publisher, and now you have 3 roles. So is admin doesn't really work anymore. You need to introduce the roles database table and user's role ID as a foreign key. So all the changes in the database look like this. So create roles table, just ID and name. Then you add a role ID to users table, and here you need to make the changes to the previous data. This is important. If you have live project already somewhere on the server and you need to make the change, it's not only about changes in the database structure, but also the data. but you can luckily use the same migration file to do whatever you want. For example, call the seed for roles, then update the admin user to a specific role that you wish, and then drop the column. So you can mix the data changes and the structure changes. Here's how role seeder looks like. Then we have user seeder also changed because we need specific seeder for admin and for publisher. Then changes in the models are as follows. So post table has is published, a new field, role is a totally different new role model. And then in user, for convenience, we add constants, which role is which. So user ID 1, publisher ID 2, and admin ID 3. So is admin middleware already checks not is admin, but role ID comparing to this constant. And then in the form request of post create and update, you can use something like this, which basically means Boolean rule for is published, and when the user is role user, it's prohibited. There are some more changes to the factory, so post is published false by default, user factory by default is role ID 1. Also we need state for admin and for publisher in the factories. Then of course we change the views, the create blade, so we show that is published checkbox only if it's admin or publisher. Same for post edit, and this is where we use those constants, role admin and role publisher, and also we use that constant in the index blade to check if role is admin. But the tests should not fail, it should still be green, and that's the whole purpose of automated tests. They should prove that the old functionality still work, that we didn't break anything for older users, but we add a few assertions. So assert forbidden is a shorter way to this one, assert status, and also assert that there's still one post in the database. And then we add a few more tests. So test that user cannot see is published checkbox on create post page. It's a long name for test function name, for method name, but that's the whole point of test specific scenario. And then test another one for edit post page. Then test that admin user can see and publisher can see. Also a few checks for the backend, so cannot set. It's not just seeing the checkbox, but also if you're loading the URL manually, so you wouldn't be able to hack it. So tests cover both front-end and back-end logic. So that's it, our pull request number 2 is covered. Our next change in pull request number 3 comes not from the client, but from your colleague developer. For example, your manager, developer, or CTO or something, who says, I don't like this line, it's too long, it's not really flexible, so what if you add more lines and more rows? Let's use Laravel policies for that. So our pull request number 3 is for exactly that. So we introduce the permissions or gates called publish, and in the boot method we have publish, gate defined with post policy. Post policy looks like this. So there's a method publish, and it's more convenient there to use the publish everywhere because there are a few places in the code where you need to check that on the back end and the front end. And then, for example, in the form request class, we can use cannot publish, which is even more readable. Then in the controller, instead of doing construct for one method, we also use this authorize, which uses delete method from the policy of post policy. So this one, so only admin can delete. So it's basically just refactoring of the code, but no new features are introduced in this pull request. So everywhere in the blade files, we change the if statements to can publish or can delete. An important thing here that tests weren't changed. So tests should cover, if you refactor something, for example, if statements into policies, your tests, when you run PHP Artisan test, they should be green. And at this point, you probably should thank your past self that you had written your automated tests. Pull request number 4 and change number 4 now comes from the client, who says, now we need another role called viewer, who would not be able to delete or create or anything, just view the table. And at this point, you yourself as a developer or your colleague manager says, okay, screw it, roles are not enough, we need permissions here. Because then in the future, maybe the client will think about 5th role or 6th role or whoever, or mix the roles, something like that. So you need to introduce permissions. And this is a pull request for that. I will not comment on all the changes, I will just run through them because it would take quite a lot of time. Links to all the pull requests and repositories are in the description of this video, so you can check that out. So database changes, we add permissions table. Then we add permission role table as a pivot table, and then we change the database seeder to add permission seeder and then viewer role seeder. Permission seeder is just those 5. So now we have not the publish and destroy as gates with policies, but actually the permissions. And for admin, we see the permissions of everything. For publisher, everything except delete. Cool. Then viewer role seeder is just seeding the role, but they have no permission for any management. And then everywhere in Blade, we use those permissions: post publish, post create, post delete, and all of those. Also, we use the same in the controller, so post view, post create, and it's all now permissions and not directly the role. So it's much more flexible that you would have permission role structure and would be able to add more roles in the future. And we enable those by having auth service provider permission policies defined, just calling the method, which in fact has a lot of gate define statements inside. So if we have permissions table, that is important for not breaking the previous code. So for each of all permissions, if we have the role for that permission for the specific user we're logged in with, we gate define it's true or false. So as a result, we'll have a lot of gate define statements executed here. Now, do we change the tests? No, the old tests should still be working. We just add new tests for the viewer. So test viewer can view posts list, and viewer can view post, but doesn't see any buttons and cannot manage the post from the backend. And also we add permissions policy, so they would be run in the setup method of the test case, because at this point the auth service provider is not run for the tests. So it's kind of like a hack or a workaround to reuse the same permissions policies defined for the testing as well. Final pull request and final change comes from both client and your technical manager, for example. They sit down and discuss that in the future the client should be able to edit roles, edit permissions, so they would not disturb the developers anymore because the project is constantly changing. So then it would look something like this. So they would be able to edit some role and assign permission or delete permission, or add a totally new role with more or less permissions. So for that, you introduce a package called Spotty Laravel permission, which allows you to assign permission pretty flexibly. This change is probably the most massive so far that we had in this project, so you need to remove probably all the constants, all the relationships, because now they come from the package. And I will not comment all the pull requests. Again, the link is in the description below, but I will touch the main points. So now instead of having role ID, we have user assign role, which comes from the Spotty permissions. Permission table is much more filled with various features that also comes from the package. Then you need to clean up a separate migration, transforming the permission role values to the Spotty roles permission seeder. So you need to drop the foreign key, drop the tables, and then remove the database seeder permission and viewer role seeder, and instead introduce Spotty roles permission seeder with those roles and those permissions. Then you create the role manager page that I've shown you visually, which is middleware by role admin, so accessible only by admin. And the tests, again, should get you covered, and nothing should break from the old features for user, publisher, viewer, or admin, or editor, or whatever. The only thing in this case that we needed to change with colleague Nereus, apparently SQLite, and I didn't know that by the way, SQLite doesn't support dropping the foreign key. So there is kind of a hack thing to hotfix SQLite with resolving the connection in a bit different way. So that's not directly related to this lesson of refactoring, but you may be interested how to solve drop foreign for SQLite specifically. So that's it, this long journey of 5 pull requests, and the goal here was to mimic the real life scenario and how to think and how to cover everything with tests, so you would be more confident to refactor the code, whatever that refactoring may be. Data changes, structure changes, middleware changes, or whatever. What do you think about this process? Is it realistic enough? What would you have done differently maybe? And if you want more stories like this one, I have a few courses which are exactly that, creating real projects, which is live coding the checklister project, which is 6 hours long, or a more shorter version of real projects from Upwork, which is JustStream with Livewire, or mini Reddit from Laravel 8. So you can check those courses out, or subscribe to yearly membership, which will give you all the courses, all the 21 courses which are available now, and everything for a year ahead in the future. That's it for now, and see you guys in other videos.